Okay, so this is the Bible study for James chapter 2, verses 14 through 26. And the text says, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you say to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, 'You have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds.' You believe that there is one God? Good, even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person, do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead." So remember that you can download PDF copies of this Bible study at www.abqnaz.org/alive so that you can follow along with us as we study this text. Number one says, what questions does James ask rhetorically in verse 14? He says, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if we claim to have faith and have no deeds? That's the first question. And B, question 2 is, can such faith save them? So the first is, what good is it if somebody has faith without deeds? And the second is, can that kind of faith save them? And that's really a rhetorical question, or two rhetorical questions that are setting up the rest of what James has to say in this text. So that's just sort of a thesis sentence. It's sort of a topic that he's laying out and he's ready to answer. And number two, how does James answer the question? A, he doesn't. We should answer them how we think they should be answered, or by what we've heard people say before. So let me just say that James isn't leaving it up for discussion. The reason he's asking rhetorical questions is because when he asks some of these questions, he believes the answers are obvious, and that actually was a way of reasoning rather than telling people what to think, asking questions to let the person think for themselves and consider, particularly when the answer to the questions leads in an obvious direction, but it helps us come to it on our own. And so that was in Greek society a common form of teaching. We see Jesus doing it. We see obviously James now doing that here with his readers. B, in verse 16, James uses logic to show that good intentions are useless without actions to back them up. So that's how he answers the question. He begins to paint the picture and use logic to show in every way. It doesn't matter that I say I believe something or that I say something. The actions have to back it up, or else it's completely useless. See, in verse 18, James explains that it is impossible to show your faith without deeds. Instead, deeds are how our faith is displayed and are the natural outgrowth of true faith. So how do you show faith? You show faith by the actions you take on that faith. So you can't see faith, you see what faith leads a person to do. So if I believe something, then there are some natural responses, some natural things that I will do if I really believe this. Like if you really believe if you really believe something, then there is a natural course of action, an obvious course of action. Anybody with a brain in their head would do this if they believed that was true. For instance, if I really believed, if I was in a thrift store and I really believed that something was worth $1 million in there, but they were selling it for $10, I would buy that thing. It would be foolish not to buy that thing. Everybody knows somebody that could buy something for $10. The only reason you wouldn't is if you didn't have $10. But if it was just $10 as opposed to $1,000, you'd probably go find $10, find a way to get $10 to buy that thing that was worth $1 million that somebody else didn't realize the value of. So there is a natural and obvious thing that you would do if you believe that. Now, if you didn't buy that, if you didn't go to the, you might tell somebody that's $1 million thing right there, but they're not going to believe you, because if you really believe that, you would do something. You probably wouldn't be telling them about it. You'd be buying it. And so they're not going to act on your faith. They're not going to go buy it if you don't believe it enough to go buy it. So the point of this is that James is trying to explain to us, this is what it looks like to have faith. The way we show our faith is by what we do, and that shows what we believe. So when I was in my doctoral program, we did a study on worldview and read some books about it. And worldview is basically what you believe about the world, what the problem with the world is, what the solution for the world is, that sort of thing. What you believe, sort of the basic reason for things in the world is, and the idea is worldview is pretty important, because depending on what your worldview is, you come to entirely different conclusions about what the right thing to do is. And so our entire moral system is generally based on a Christian worldview. I'm not saying a lot of people have a Christian worldview, but when we wonder why other people behave differently, it's because they don't believe the same thing about the world and so they set up a different moral system or no moral system. But the reason I'm talking about that is one of the most important things that I learned or I read when we were studying that is that your worldview is not what you say it is, it's what you show it is. So if I say this is what I believe about the world, but then my actions say something different, then I don't really believe what I say I believe what I show I believe. For instance, I had somebody during the pandemic, when the shutdowns began to happen, come to me and tell me that they thought this was sort of the end of the world. They thought that this was the return of Christ, and anyway, they were kind of talking about that, and they asked me what I think, and I said, well, I think that if that's true, and I wasn't taking a stand on whether it was true or not, but I said, I think that if that's true, we would be doing something entirely different. So if we really believe this was the end of the world, we would be doing the things that we needed to do, or that we thought were important to do before the end of the world, before the return of Christ. We weren't doing those things. There's nothing more important to me than being with my family, than worshiping my God. But guess what? Those are the things that we were not doing during those times. We weren't spending time with our families that didn't live in the same house with us. We weren't spending our time worshiping God. We all followed the rules and stayed home instead of coming for corporate worship. And basically I said, if we believed that, we would be doing something different. And my point was that I didn't really think that he believed that. And that if he did, then maybe we need to take that conviction seriously and go do something different. D, in verse 19, James uses logic again to describe a clear example of how belief is exhibited by beings that we know are not saved or righteous, and therefore simple belief can't be the same as saving faith. So he says, even the demons believe that and shudder. So they believe in God. So that is not enough. And we know that demons are not saved. We know that demons are not righteous. So believing in that way is not enough. You have to believe in a way that causes you to act on that belief. And that's what James is trying to tell us about faith. In verses 20 through 23 and 25, James gives examples from Israel's history that show how people of faith were always affirmed or considered righteous because of their acts of faith and not just their thoughts or words. So he tells stories that the people that are listening, if this was a Jewish audience, would know. And he says, weren't they considered righteous? How were they considered righteous? Because they had faith? Yes. But how did we know they had faith? Because they acted on that faith and they were considered righteous. Number 3 says, how then, according to verse 24, is a person judged and considered righteous? Verse 24 says, you see that a person is considered righteous by what they do and not by faith alone. So A says by simply believing, and that is not true. B, if they say they are Christian, and that is not true. C, by what they do, they will be judged. They will be considered righteous by what they do. Number 4, what does verse 26 tell us about faith? It says, as a body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. Faith without deeds is dead, or really non-existent. Faith without deeds does not really exist. Number 5 says, how do actions display faith? Give examples. I gave a couple examples. If I thought that there was nothing more important, if I thought Jesus was coming back tomorrow and that gathering in church was important, then I would do that no matter what anything else said, because gathering in church is important and Jesus is coming back. You better find me doing something that's the important thing. We could say, I believe tithing is a display of faith. I believe scripture teaches that. In other words, we are saying that I know that God gave me what I have. This paycheck, I know that God provided it. I didn't provide it. God provided it. He gave me the ability to work for it. Therefore, he provided it. I trust him with my provision. He's the one that gave me this, and he can give me more. Therefore, I'm giving him the first fruits of what he already gave me. And I'm putting my trust in him that there's going to be another paycheck. Because if you don't think there's another paycheck coming, what do? You hoard it, you save it. You don't go out and blow it. You make sure there's enough stored up, for the lean times. And we know that that's wisdom. So we're doing something that's contrary to wisdom, or at least worldly wisdom, because we trust in God and we believe that God is actually involved. So tithing displays faith. There have been times when I've made decisions about my job situation in a way that I didn't think this was the best decision from a worldly perspective, but I believed God was in it. And therefore I decided if he was in it, then he was going to take care of the things that I didn't think were best. If I didn't think I had enough money to care for my kids properly or things like that, I decided that if he wanted me in this situation and he wanted me in ministry and he wanted me here, then he would make sure my kids are taken care of. So I trusted him by being the place where he wanted me to be, doing the thing that he wanted me to be doing. So those are the things that display faith. How can actions or lack of actions show a lack of faith? Give examples. Well, the opposite. If we don't tithe, if we feel like we need to go out and provide for ourselves, I've seen people jump and take a better paying job because they felt like they needed to care for their family and it was the best thing to do and it was wise. And then I've watched them lose their family, and the family end in divorce, and they lost their kids because they focused on the job that they thought was a good idea to provide for their family, but they didn't trust God to provide for their family. We could spend a lot of time, and I want to encourage you, if you're teaching this, to allow the class to throw in options. Maybe we've done things that display faith, and maybe we've done things that didn't display faith, and list those out. Number 7 says, do your actions display living, saving faith? Or do they display, what are your actions showing? Are they displaying faith or a lack of faith?